August 19, 1944. Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the collapsing Western Front. The Americans have outrun their logistics. The morning briefing room at Wolf's Lair hummed with quiet confidence as senior Wehrmacht officers gathered around the massive oak table. Maps of France, spread before them, showed American spearheads stretched impossibly thin across 400 miles of liberated territory. General Jodl's weathered fingers traced the supply lines from Normandy beaches to Patton's advancing Third Army, his calculations precise and damning. "Gentlemen," Jodl announced to the assembled staff, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent mastering the logistics of modern warfare, "the Americans have committed the cardinal sin of mechanized operations. They have advanced beyond their supply capacity." The room stirred with anticipation. These were men who had pioneered blitzkrieg, who understood intimately the tyranny of fuel consumption and ammunition expenditure that governed armored warfare. Major General Siegfried Westphal, soon to become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, leaned forward over his calculations. An armoured division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily during sustained advance operations. Patton commanded 12 divisions spread across a 60-mile front. The mathematics were inescapable. 12,000 tons of supplies required daily, transported 400 miles from the beaches over roads the Wehrmacht had systematically destroyed during their fighting withdrawal. "The Americans face what we faced in Russia," observed General der Panzertrooper Heinrich von Luttwitz, commander of the 47th Panzer Corps. His voice carried bitter experience from the Eastern Front, where German spearheads had repeatedly outrun their horse-drawn supply wagons. "Distance defeats armies more surely than enemy action. Machines require fuel, ammunition, replacement parts. The laws of physics cannot be violated, not even by American industry." The intelligence reports painted a picture of impending American collapse that confirmed every Wehrmacht assumption about logistics warfare. German reconnaissance units reported observing American forward elements halted for hours, waiting for fuel trucks that arrived in insufficient numbers. Patton's tank crews were rationing ammunition, something unthinkable during the early days of the Normandy breakout, when American artillery had fired without restriction. Colonel Hans von Luck, whose battle group had conducted reconnaissance missions behind American lines, provided ground truth that supported the staff calculations. "Their supply columns stretch endlessly," he reported, "but they move slowly, cautiously, stopping frequently for mechanical repairs. American trucks break down constantly on our damaged roads. They lack the robust engineering of German vehicles designed for poor conditions." The Wehrmacht had learned these lessons through brutal experience on the Russian steppes, where supply lines stretched across vast distances and primitive infrastructure. German quartermasters had calculated every gallon of fuel, every round of ammunition, every ton of food required to sustain advancing forces. They had developed an almost mystical understanding of the relationship between distance, consumption, and operational tempo. Furthermore, General Jodl continued, consulting intelligence estimates, American fuel consumption exceeds their transport capacity by significant margins. Each Sherman tank burns half a mile per gallon on roads, far worse cross-country. Infantry divisions require 700 tons of supplies daily. Armored divisions need 1,000 tons minimum. The Americans cannot sustain such consumption rates over such distances. The officers nodded in agreement. These calculations matched their own operational experience. The Wehrmacht had attempted similar advances in Russia and North Africa, only to watch their spearheads grind to a halt when fuel trucks failed to arrive. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful planning, conservative fuel allocation, and realistic assessment of supply capacity. The Americans appeared to have abandoned all such prudence in their reckless dash across France. "Intelligence indicates," Westphal added, reading from intercepted American communications, "that Patton's forward elements are already experiencing supply shortages. His tank crews report fuel rationing. Artillery units have reduced their fire missions. These are clear indicators of logistical strain approaching the breaking point. The German staff possessed intimate knowledge of how quickly mechanized forces consumed resources. During Operation Barbarossa, entire panzer divisions had become immobilized not from Soviet resistance, but from empty fuel tanks hundreds of miles from German supply depots. Horse-drawn wagons, still comprising 80% of German military transport, could not match the speed of armoured spearheads. Railway gauge differences meant supplies accumulated at transfer points, while forward units starved. The American advance will halt within 48 hours, predicted General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, whose mathematical precision in logistics planning had earned him command of elite armoured formations. Physical laws govern warfare, regardless of national character. No army in history has sustained such rapid advance over such distances. The Americans will learn what we learned in Russia. The confidence in the briefing room was palpable. These officers had studied Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, analysed the Roman legion's supply challenges, and experienced firsthand the limitations that geography imposed on even the most mechanized armies. American industrial capacity might produce tanks and aircraft in impressive numbers, but it could not repeal the fundamental mathematics of military logistics. When Patton's advance stalls, Jodl concluded, we will have time to establish defensive positions at the Seine River. Perhaps we can hold until winter, weather grounds their aircraft, and slows their operations further. The Americans have given us an opportunity, through their own overconfidence, in mechanical solutions to strategic problems. The German generals had calculated correctly. Their mathematics were sound, their experience was vast, their confidence was absolute. They understood logistics warfare better than any army in history. What they could not calculate was American industrial abundance that would make their expertise irrelevant within 72 hours. The next morning brought fresh intelligence reports that solidified German confidence in American logistical collapse. Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich von Mellenthin, Chief Intelligence Officer for Army Group G, spread reconnaissance photographs across his desk in the converted French chateau that served as headquarters. The images told a story that confirmed every Wehrmacht calculation about the impossibility of sustained mechanized advance. Observe these aerial photographs from August 20th, Mellenthin announced to his staff, pointing to black and white images showing American supply columns strung out across hundreds of miles of French countryside. Single-lane convoys moving at 15 miles per hour maximum speed, frequent stops for mechanical repairs, vehicles abandoned along roadsides when they break down beyond field repair capability. Major Wilhelm Keitel leaned over the photographs with a magnifying glass. The details were damning. American trucks overloaded beyond manufacturer specifications, tires worn smooth from excessive mileage, engines smoking from overheating caused by inadequate maintenance schedules. They're destroying their vehicles faster than they can replace them, he observed with professional satisfaction. The mathematics supported visual evidence. German intelligence had calculated American truck production capacity at 2,000 vehicles weekly across all manufacturers. Current consumption rates in France exceeded 1,500 vehicles weekly through mechanical failure, combat loss, and abandonment. Within 6 weeks, Mellenthin predicted, they'll have no functional transport remaining, even if we never fire another shot. Oberst Hans Speidel, Rommel's former chief of staff, now serving with Army Group B, provided the most damaging intelligence assessment. His agents had infiltrated American rear areas disguised as French civilians, observing supply operations firsthand. American logistics operates in complete chaos, he reported. No central coordination, competing demands from multiple army groups, truck drivers operating beyond human endurance limits. The system is collapsing from internal contradictions. The German staff possessed decades of experience managing limited resources across vast distances. They understood that successful logistics required meticulous planning, careful resource allocation, and realistic assessment of transport capacity. American operations violated every principle of sound supply management that German military science had developed through painful experience. "Consider the fuel requirements alone," continued Spadel, consulting his detailed calculations. "Patton's 12 divisions require 1 million gallons daily just for vehicle operations. Add aviation fuel, heating, cooking, generator operation, and total consumption exceeds 1.5 million gallons. American tanker trucks carry 1,500 gallons maximum. That requires 1,000 truck trips daily just for fuel delivery." The numbers became more impossible when German analysts factored in round-trip distances. From Normandy beaches to Patton's forward positions measured 400 miles one way. Average truck speed on damaged roads rarely exceeded 20 miles per hour. Each fuel delivery required 40 hours round-trip, assuming no mechanical failures, no traffic delays, no enemy interdiction. Mathematically impossible. Mellenthin concluded. They need 4,000 fuel trucks operating simultaneously. Intelligence indicates they possess fewer than 800. Captain Rudolf von Gersdorf provided additional evidence of American logistical strain. Intercepted radio communications revealed growing desperation among American supply officers. "Their own transmissions confirm our analysis," he reported. Repeated requests for additional trucks, complaints about vehicle breakdown rates, orders to reduce ammunition expenditure. These are clear indicators of a logistics system approaching total collapse. The Wehrmacht intelligence picture painted American forces as mechanically sophisticated but logistically naive. German observers noted American dependence on complex machinery that required constant maintenance, high-quality fuel, and specialized parts. "They've created a supply system more fragile than ours," observed Mellenthin. "Our horses don't need spare parts. Our wagons don't consume fuel." German confidence reached its peak when intelligence reported American fuel shortages at forward positions. Patton's tank crews were mixing aviation gasoline with automotive fuel to stretch supplies. Artillery units had reduced their fire missions by 50% to conserve ammunition. These were unmistakable signs of logistical failure that German experience recognized immediately. "The Americans have learned nothing from our Russian experience," Spadel concluded with satisfaction. "They've repeated every mistake we made in Operation Barbarossa. Overextended supply lines, inadequate transport capacity, unrealistic consumption assumptions. Physics will defeat them where our panzers failed. Within 72 hours, Patton's advance will grind to a complete halt." The German intelligence assessment was thorough, professional, and completely wrong. They had calculated American limitations based on European precedent, never imagining that American industrial capacity could simply overwhelm mathematical impossibility through sheer abundance. The Red Ball Express was already rolling toward their positions, 300 miles west of German headquarters, in a requisitioned French chateau near Bayeux. Lieutenant Colonel John Devine Avers of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of skeptical American officers. The maps spread before them showed the same impossible mathematics that had given German generals such confidence. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in history, advancing at speeds that defied all logistical planning. Traditional supply methods had collapsed under the strain. "Gentlemen," Avers announced, his voice cutting through the humid August morning air thick with cigarette smoke and tension, "we're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines. Every vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24, no stopping except for gas and emergencies. We'll move 12,500 tons daily minimum." The silence that followed was deafening. Colonel Charles Thrasher, commanding the Advanced Section Communications Zone, leaned back in his wooden chair, the mathematics racing through his mind. The proposal violated every principle of military logistics he had learned at the Command and General Staff College. "Colonel," he said slowly, "what you're describing requires 140 truck companies, nearly 6,000 vehicles operating at 90% availability. That's impossible by any logistics textbook." Major General Frank Ross, Deputy Commander of the Services of Supply, studied the charts showing American consumption rates. Every statistic screamed impossibility. Patton's 12 divisions were burning through ammunition at rates that exceeded the Wehrmacht's entire monthly allocation. Fuel consumption had reached levels that would bankrupt European armies. Vehicle breakdown rates were climbing toward 30% daily as trucks operated beyond all manufacturer specifications. "The mathematics are stark," Ross continued, his finger tracing supply routes on the map. 400 miles from the beaches to Patton's forward elements, round trip 800 miles. Our trucks average 20 miles per hour on damaged roads. That's 40 hours per delivery cycle. We need continuous flow to maintain 12,000 tons daily. The numbers don't work with conventional logistics. Captain Robert Henderson, a former Detroit automotive engineer, now serving as a quartermaster officer, had been calculating furiously on a yellow legal pad. "Sir," he interjected, "General Motors produced over 500,000 trucks by war's end. We're not fighting a European war with European resources. We can afford to operate differently." The American approach, emerging in that stuffy chateau, represented a fundamental philosophical break from European military thinking. Where German doctrine emphasized conservation, Americans were learning to rely on abundance. Where European armies carefully husbanded resources, American industry was producing more than armies could consume. The concept taking shape would have horrified German logistics officers trained to calculate every gallon of fuel. "We'll establish 2 parallel one-way highways," Avers continued, warming to his revolutionary concept. "One for loaded trucks going forward, one for empties returning. 24-hour operations with headlights blazing. Forget blackout discipline, no stop policy, except for fuel and mechanical failure. 5-minute convoy intervals maintaining 35 miles per hour average speed." The technical specifications defied German military doctrine completely. Mobile maintenance units every 50 miles. Military police checkpoints removing any vehicle below 25 miles per hour. Fuel dumps established at regular intervals, with capacity exceeding entire German strategic reserves. The scale was breathtaking and terrifying. Colonel William Whipple understood the strategic implications immediately. "This isn't just about moving supplies," he observed. "We're creating a logistics system that makes distance irrelevant. If we can deliver 12,000 tons daily over 400 miles, we can sustain advance rates that will shatter German defensive planning." The name came from railway terminology familiar to transportation officers. A Red Bull freight was an express shipment that took priority over everything else. The Red Bull Express would operate on the same principle. Absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. German military planning assumed maximum daily advances of 20 to 30 miles for mechanized forces. The Red Bull would enable Patton to sustain 50 to 60 miles daily indefinitely. "The demographic reality presents challenges," noted Major James Robinson, personnel officer for the Transportation Corps. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate the route, approximately 75% would be African American soldiers serving in a still segregated army. These men, denied equal rights at home, would keep the most celebrated white general's army in motion. The irony was not lost on the assembled officers. Men who couldn't eat in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America would be proving their capabilities on the highways of France. They would be demonstrating that Hitler's racial theories were not just morally wrong but strategically stupid. Within 36 hours of that meeting, the impossible was operational. On August 26th, 1944, drivers from the 396th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm artillery shells, bound for Patton's guns 300 miles east. The Red Ball Express was about to prove that American industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency couldn't match. German generals who had laughed at American logistics were about to receive an education in industrial warfare that would shatter their understanding of modern military operations. By August 28, 1944, German reconnaissance units began reporting something unprecedented that challenged every assumption about American military capability. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, commanding a forward observation post overlooking the main supply route from Normandy, radioed back to Army Group B headquarters with growing alarm in his voice. Continuous vehicle column observed since 0400 hours, Richter reported through crackling radio static. Headlights visible for 20 kilometers, no spacing between vehicles. No blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour passing our position. Americans have abandoned all military precaution. The report violated everything German military doctrine taught about logistics operations. Headlights at night invited air attack from whatever remained of the Luftwaffe. Continuous columns presented perfect artillery targets for any German guns within range. No spacing between vehicles meant a single disabled truck could halt an entire convoy. Yet the Americans seemed utterly unconcerned about these obvious vulnerabilities. General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions near Falaise on August 30th. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected growing alarm among German field commanders. "The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension," he wrote. "Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't follow any rules we understand. It's not military science. It's mass production applied to warfare." What the Germans couldn't understand was that American logistics operated on fundamentally different principles. Where German doctrine emphasized concealment and conservation, Americans relied on volume and redundancy. Where Germans carefully rationed vehicles and fuel, Americans assumed 20% mechanical failure rates and planned accordingly. Where Germans followed strict military procedure, Americans improvised solutions with industrial efficiency. The numbers achieved by the Red Ball Express in its first week defied every German calculation of logistical possibility. From August 25th to 31st, 1944, American trucks delivered 89,939 tons of supplies across an average distance of 343 miles. Daily average exceeded 12,800 tons. Vehicle rotations involved nearly 6,000 trucks, making 1.5 trips daily, consuming 300,000 gallons of fuel just for the operation itself. German logistics specialists, who captured these figures from American documents, initially dismissed them as propaganda. The numbers seemed impossible based on European experience with mechanized transport. No army in history had sustained such tonnage delivery over such distances while maintaining tactical operations. The mathematics suggested the Americans were either lying about their achievements or operating with resources that exceeded German comprehension. But the evidence was overwhelming and accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established operational rhythms that seemed impossible to German observers accustomed to horse-drawn wagons comprising 80% of Wehrmacht transport. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminals. Average convoy size reached 67 vehicles. Load per vehicle averaged 5 tons standard, 7 tons when overloaded. Time to cover 350 miles one way averaged 14 hours. turnaround time at each terminal required only 2 hours. The operational innovations generated by American drivers and mechanics hourly solved problems that German military science considered insurmountable. When trucks broke down, approximately 1,800 daily, mobile maintenance units performed repairs on roadsides. Mechanics developed triage systems, giving 15 minutes to fix vehicles or push them off the road. Parts were cannibalized from vehicles deemed unrepairable. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. When designated Red Bull routes became congested, drivers created alternate paths without higher authorization. They commandeered French civilian buses to move personnel and free trucks for cargo. They appropriated abandoned German vehicles, painting them olive drab and pressing them into service. They built bypasses around destroyed bridges using rubble from bombed buildings as roadbed material. German observers watching this organized chaos couldn't comprehend how it produced superior results. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful planning, maintenance schedules, and proper procedures. Americans violated every principle yet achieved efficiency that German precision couldn't match. The most stunning revelation for German artillery officers was American ammunition supply rates that exceeded their highest theoretical calculations. During operations near Falaise, American artillery units fired without restriction, while German guns were rationed to 50 rounds per day. The disparity was psychologically devastating. German gunners could hear American artillery firing continuously for hours while knowing their own ammunition supplies were nearly exhausted. General Major Walter Warlimont, observing from aerial reconnaissance photographs, wrote reports that reflected growing German despair. The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire strategic reserves, he noted. They burn more gasoline, moving gasoline, than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war, as we understand it. It's industrial overflow applied to military operations. The Red Bull Express was achieving something German military science declared impossible. It was making logistics faster than consumption, creating supply abundance in the middle of combat operations, and proving that American industrial capacity could overwhelm European military expertise through sheer abundance. The demographic composition of the Red Bull Express would have stunned German racial theorists and shattered Nazi ideology at its foundation. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate the route, approximately 75% were African American soldiers, serving in a still segregated American army. These men, who couldn't eat in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America, were keeping the most celebrated white general's army in motion across the battlefields of France. The drivers developed their own culture within hours of the operation's launch. They painted slogans on their trucks that would have enraged SS racial theorists. Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express, Freedom Road. These messages, scrawled in white paint across olive drab metal, were declarations of purpose from men who understood they were fighting two wars simultaneously, against Nazi Germany and against American racial prejudice. Private First Class Johnny Stevens from Detroit climbed into his GMC Deuce and a half every morning at 0400 hours, knowing he was carrying more than ammunition and fuel. He was carrying proof that Hitler's racial theories were not just morally reprehensible, but strategically stupid. Every mile driven, every ton delivered, every impossible deadline met demonstrated African American capability in terms that even the most prejudiced observers couldn't deny. The drivers created their own traffic rules that amazed German observers monitoring American logistics. Slower vehicles pulled off immediately when faster convoys approached. Mechanical failures were pushed into ditches rather than blocking traffic flow. Any truck operating below 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock to be bypassed or removed. These weren't official regulations, but cultural innovations developed by men who understood that their performance would be scrutinized more harshly. Sergeant William McBride from Chicago had been driving trucks for 12 hours straight when German reconnaissance aircraft spotted his convoy near Chartres. The Luftwaffe pilot radioed back to headquarters with confusion evident in his transmission. "Convoy personnel appear to be Negroes," he reported. "Vehicles maintain formation despite air observation. No evasive action. Operations continue normally." The German pilot's bewilderment reflected broader Nazi confusion about American racial dynamics. SS racial science publications had declared blacks incapable of technical tasks, lacking initiative, unsuited for modern warfare. Yet these same supposedly inferior soldiers were performing logistics miracles that German forces couldn't match with their racially pure personnel. Corporal Robert Johnson from Alabama understood the irony better than most. He had been denied the right to vote in his home state, couldn't eat at white lunch counters, faced daily humiliation under Jim Crow laws. Yet here in France, he was driving a truck loaded with artillery shells that would help destroy the Nazi regime that considered him subhuman. The physical demands placed on Red Ball Express drivers exceeded anything German military planners thought humanly possible. Drivers operated for 72 hours straight, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine tablets. They drove through rain that turned French roads into quagmires, through fog so thick that convoy spacing was determined by barely visible taillights ahead. Accidents killed 300 drivers during the operational period, but morale remained extraordinarily high. Technical Sergeant Charles Williams from Harlem had been awake for 60 hours when his truck broke down near Reims. German intelligence officers, observing from concealed positions, expected him to abandon the vehicle according to standard military procedure. Instead, Williams spent 4 hours performing field repairs with tools improvised from roadside debris. When the engine finally turned over, he continued his mission. German prisoners of war forced to work as laborers, loading Red Bull trucks, found their worldview shattered by daily interaction with African American sergeants. These prisoners had been indoctrinated with Nazi racial theory that portrayed blacks as intellectually inferior and culturally primitive. Instead, they encountered men who calculated weight distributions faster than German engineers, spoke better English than German language instructors, and treated prisoners with fairness despite everything Nazi propaganda had taught them. The Red Ball Express drivers understood what they were accomplishing beyond mere logistics. They were fighting racism with truck keys, defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance, proving Hitler wrong with every mile driven. When captured, German officers were interrogated about American supply capabilities. Many specifically mentioned their amazement at African American technical competence. Staff Sergeant Joe Louis Barrow put it most eloquently in a letter home. "Every time we deliver ammunition to Patton's guns, we're shooting down Hitler's lies about our people. Every mile we drive proves America wrong about what we can do when given the chance." The German racial theorists had no answer for this contradiction. Their ideology declared these men inferior, yet they were outperforming German logistics specialists with decades of training and experience. By September 1, 1944, German commanders began to comprehend that they faced something beyond military solution. The Red Ball Express had revealed American industrial capacity operating at scales that rendered European concepts of warfare obsolete. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, stood in his headquarters, studying intelligence reports that documented American logistics achievements no German staff officer would have believed possible 3 weeks earlier. "We are not fighting an army," Model announced to his assembled staff, his voice heavy with the weight of dawning realization. "We are fighting an entire industrial civilization that has mobilized for war. The Americans waste more resources in a single day than we can produce in a month. This is not temporary advantage. This is their normal operational capacity." The numbers that had initially seemed like propaganda were proving devastatingly real. American trucks were delivering 12,500 tons daily over distances that should have made such tonnage impossible. German calculations showed this required mathematical impossibilities: perfect weather, no mechanical failures, unlimited fuel, roads that never needed repair. Yet the Americans achieved it consistently while also sustaining combat operations. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, whose mathematical precision had earned him elite command positions, found his expertise useless against American abundance. "They operate beyond the rules of military science," he reported after observing American supply operations near Metz. "When we calculate fuel requirements, we assume scarcity and plan accordingly. Americans assume abundance and waste accordingly. They consume more fuel-moving supplies than entire German armies receive." The psychological impact on German forces was becoming more devastating than physical destruction. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear American trucks all night, every night. The endless rumble of motors that never stopped, carrying supplies that never ran short. German infantry units were rationed to 3 rounds per rifle, while American forces fired millions of rounds in single engagements. The disparity created despair that undermined combat effectiveness more effectively than any Allied psychological warfare. German intelligence had calculated that the Red Ball Express would collapse within days from mechanical attrition. Instead, American production was replacing destroyed vehicles faster than combat, and breakdowns could eliminate them. Ships arrived weekly at French ports, carrying hundreds of new trucks. Replacement drivers were trained in 2 days and immediately integrated into convoys. The Americans had achieved something Germans thought impossible: logistics capacity that increased rather than decreased under stress. The vehicles themselves represented industrial capabilities that German engineers found incomprehensible. The GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, backbone of the Red Ball Express, incorporated features that German vehicles lacked despite decades of engineering tradition. All-wheel drive as standard equipment, automatic tire inflation systems, waterproofing that allowed 30-inch fording, engines that operated on low-quality fuel without modification. More stunning was American maintenance philosophy that violated every principle of German resource conservation. Where Germans rebuilt engines, Americans replaced them entirely. Where Germans carefully rationed parts, Americans discarded entire vehicles for minor problems. Where Germans employed master mechanics who could repair anything, Americans used thousands of competent mechanics who could perform 80% of repairs. Volume overwhelmed expertise. The Red Ball Express demonstrated American ability to create temporary infrastructure that exceeded permanent German installations. Engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges while the operation continued. They established 15 major fuel depots, with capacity exceeding entire German strategic reserves. They constructed 26 maintenance stations and 8 temporary cities for drivers. All accomplished while maintaining continuous operations that German staff officers required weeks to plan. Captain Hans von Luck, whose reconnaissance units observed American operations daily, provided reports that reflected growing German demoralization. "The Americans build faster than we can destroy," he noted. "They create infrastructure overnight in French fields that appears superior to our permanent installations. No planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just immediate action that produces results." German artillery officers faced the most psychologically damaging evidence of American abundance. During the reduction of Metz fortifications, American artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every round plus 20% surplus. German artillery defending Metz was rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The Red Ball Express consumed vehicles at rates that would have paralyzed European armies. By late September, mechanical attrition reached staggering proportions. Average vehicle life dropped to 10,000 miles compared to normal 30,000. Daily deadline rates approached 30% of all vehicles. Engines were replaced 500 weekly. Tires consumed 10,000 weekly. Total vehicles destroyed or abandoned exceeded 5,000. Yet the operation accelerated rather than collapsed. American production had anticipated such losses and prepared accordingly. The contradiction between European assumptions about resource limitations and American industrial reality created cognitive dissonance among German commanders trained to husband every resource carefully. French civilians, along Red Ball routes, witnessed American abundance that contradicted years of German occupation scarcity. Red Ball drivers, particularly African Americans, often shared their rations with French civilians despite regulations. Every stop, children gathered and drivers distributed chocolate, cigarettes, soap. The contrast with German occupation was stark. German intelligence reported the propaganda impact with growing alarm. French civilians now believe American victory inevitable, noted one assessment. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along Red Ball routes. The population that accepted our occupation now actively opposes it. Field Marshal Model's final assessment captured German realization of their hopeless situation. The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans have created a temporary civilization that exists only to feed armies, then dissolves when no longer needed. We build permanent infrastructure over years. They create superior systems in days. The tactical implications of the Red Ball Express became devastatingly clear to German field commanders as Patton's advance accelerated beyond every calculation of what mechanized forces could achieve. General der Panzertruppe Heinz Guderian, father of German armored doctrine, received reports from the Western Front that challenged his lifetime understanding of operational mobility. American divisions were moving faster and farther than German theory deemed physically possible. Patton's Third Army has advanced 67 miles in a single day, reported Oberst Hans Krebs from Army Group B headquarters, his voice betraying disbelief at the numbers. The 4th Armored Division covered 35 miles in morning operations, halted for resupply at noon, and advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon. This violates every principle of mechanized warfare we have developed. German defensive planning had assumed maximum daily advances of 20 to 30 miles for enemy armoured forces under optimal conditions. These calculations were based on decades of experience with fuel consumption rates, mechanical failure patterns, and the inevitable logistics slowdown that occurred when spearheads outran their supply lines. Patton's divisions, supplied by the Red Ball Express, were sustaining 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks without pause. The speed itself was psychologically devastating to German defenders. Wehrmacht units would establish defensive positions based on intelligence showing American forces 2 days' march away, only to find Patton's tanks in their rear areas by dawn. Traditional defensive planning became impossible when enemy advance rates exceeded all historical precedent. Major General Friedrich Schulz, commanding the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, experienced this tactical impossibility firsthand near Nancy on September 8th. We prepared positions to defend against American forces, reported 40 miles west at 0600 hours, he later wrote in his after-action report. By 1400 hours, American tanks were attacking our flanks. No army moves 40 miles in 8 hours while maintaining combat effectiveness. The Red Ball Express had eliminated the fundamental constraint that governed all previous military operations: the relationship between distance and time in logistics. German commanders had built their careers understanding that advancing armies slowed as they moved farther from their supply bases. Supply lines stretched, vehicles broke down, fuel ran short, ammunition became scarce. These iron laws of warfare had governed military planning since Napoleon. Patton's advance shattered these assumptions. His tanks moved faster on September 10th than they had on August 25th, because the Red Ball Express had created a logistics system that accelerated rather than decelerated under pressure. German intelligence officers, monitoring American radio traffic, reported conversations that would have been impossible in any European army. Request immediate resupply at grid coordinates, transmitted an American tank commander near Metz. We've got enough fuel and ammunition to advance another 20 miles today, if trucks arrive by 1600 hours. The transmission was intercepted by German listeners who initially dismissed it as deception. No armoured force that had already advanced 50 miles could contemplate another 20-mile advance the same day. But Red Ball trucks were already en route, carrying fuel and ammunition that would arrive exactly on schedule. Within hours, Patton's armour was moving again, leaving German defenders scrambling to reposition forces that couldn't match American mobility. The psychological impact on German tactical planning was profound. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized careful reconnaissance, deliberate preparation, and methodical advance. German officers planned operations assuming reasonable time for preparation and movement. American forces, supplied by the Red Ball Express, eliminated preparation time entirely. The Americans don't pause, observed General der Artillerie Max Simon, whose 13th SS Corps faced Patton's advance near the Moselle River. They attack, advance, resupply, and attack again without operational pauses. Our planning assumes enemies require rest, reorganization, resupply cycles. The Americans operate continuously. German counterattack planning became exercises in futility. By the time Wehrmacht forces could organize and launch counteroffensives, American spearheads had advanced beyond the range of German planning maps. The speed of American advance meant German intelligence was consistently 48 hours behind American positions. The Red Ball Express had created a tactical revolution that German military science couldn't counter. Distance had become irrelevant, time had accelerated, and the fundamental mathematics of warfare had changed. German generals who had mastered the art of mechanized warfare found their expertise useless against American logistics that operated beyond all previous military experience. Desperation drove German commanders to attempt increasingly futile responses to the Red Ball Express, as the reality of American logistics superiority became undeniable. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Supreme Commander West, convened emergency planning sessions to develop countermeasures against what he termed the American supply miracle. The options available revealed the hopelessness of Germany's position. "We must interdict their supply lines," declared General de Flieger Hugo Spurler, commanding Luftflotte 3, during a heated conference at Fontainebleau on September 12. 200 aircraft concentrated against their truck convoys could destroy enough vehicles to halt their advance. The proposal sounded reasonable until staff officers presented the mathematics of impossibility. The Red Ball Express operated 6,000 trucks simultaneously across multiple routes spanning hundreds of miles. To achieve meaningful interdiction, German aircraft would need to destroy 200 trucks daily just to match American replacement rates. The entire Luftwaffe in France possessed fewer than 150 operational aircraft total, most allocated to defensive missions protecting German cities. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, one of Germany's most experienced fighter pilots, provided brutal honesty about aerial interdiction prospects. "We launch 50 aircraft on a maximum effort mission," he calculated grimly. "We might destroy 30 American trucks while losing 15 aircraft we cannot replace. The Americans replace those trucks within 48 hours. We cannot replace our pilots or planes at all." The Luftwaffe's impotence against American logistics reflected broader German resource exhaustion. Aviation fuel had become so scarce that pilot training had virtually ceased. New aircraft rolled off production lines only to sit grounded for lack of fuel. Experienced pilots had been killed faster than replacements could be trained. The force that had once dominated European skies could barely maintain reconnaissance flights. Ground-based interdiction proved equally futile. German artillery units attempted to target Red Ball convoys, but lacked sufficient ammunition for sustained bombardment. A single German battery might receive 20 rounds daily, while American convoys delivered 20,000 rounds to Allied artillery units. The mathematical disparity made effective interdiction impossible. Major General Rudolf von Gersdorf, commanding artillery for the 7th Army, reported the psychological impact on his gunners. "My men watch endless American convoys pass while we ration every shell," he wrote. "They understand we're fighting with empty magazines against an enemy with full warehouses." Morale collapses, not from fear, but from hopelessness. Sabotage operations offered no better prospects. German special forces attempted to destroy bridges and fuel depots supporting Red Ball operations, only to discover American engineering capabilities that matched their logistics efficiency. Bridges demolished at night were rebuilt by morning. Fuel dumps destroyed on Monday were operational again by Wednesday. The most revealing failure was Germany's desperate attempt to create their own version of the Red Ball Express. Operation Greif, planned for the Battle of the Bulge, included provisions for captured American trucks to establish German supply lines. The effort collapsed immediately upon implementation. German drivers couldn't maintain American operational speeds. German mechanics couldn't repair American equipment efficiently. German fuel supplies couldn't sustain American consumption rates. Most fundamentally, Germans couldn't replicate the American attitude of unlimited resources. "We captured 50 American trucks," reported Oberstleutnant Otto Skorzeny. "Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." The winter of 1944–45 provided the Red Ball Express's ultimate test and demonstrated German impotence most clearly. Freezing rain, snow, and ice should have stopped wheeled transport, according to German doctrine. Wehrmacht operations ceased below -10 degrees Celsius. Yet, Red Ball convoys continued moving through blizzards that halted German panzer divisions. German observers reported ice-covered American trucks moving through weather conditions that had immobilized German armor. The Americans had created a logistics system that functioned regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. It wasn't elegant or efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. The cumulative effect of failed German responses created despair among Wehrmacht leadership. Every countermeasure proved inadequate against American industrial abundance. By October 1, 1944, senior German commanders recognized the hopelessness of their situation, with crystalline clarity that no amount of strategic wishful thinking could obscure. The Red Ball Express had demonstrated American capabilities that rendered traditional military resistance futile. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, summoned his staff for what would become known as the Reality Conference, a brutal assessment of Germany's position that abandoned all pretense of eventual victory. "Gentlemen," Model announced to the assembled officers in his headquarters near Cologne, his voice carrying the weight of inevitable defeat, "we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant, weather irrelevant, and our interdiction efforts irrelevant. We are not fighting a superior army. We are fighting a superior civilization that has mobilized its entire industrial capacity for our destruction." The statistics Model presented painted a picture of mathematical impossibility. American trucks were delivering 15,000 tons daily across distances that should have rendered such tonnage unachievable. German forces defending the West Wall were rationed to 30 rounds per artillery piece, while American guns fired without restriction. Wehrmacht units received fuel allocations that would barely sustain defensive operations, while American armor advanced 60 miles daily without pause. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, whose expertise in logistics had earned him elite commands throughout the war, provided the most damning assessment. "We calculated American logistics based on European precedent," he admitted with professional honesty. "We assumed they would face the same limitations that constrained our operations in Russia, North Africa, and Italy. We were wrong by factors of magnitude we couldn't comprehend." The psychological surrender preceded military surrender by months. German officers who had dismissed American logistics as wasteful and undisciplined watched those same Americans achieve supply miracles that German precision couldn't match. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds had been educated in European military academies that emphasized careful resource management and tactical efficiency. They faced an enemy that achieved victory through industrial abundance rather than tactical brilliance. Oberst Hans Speidel, Rommel's former chief of staff, articulated the philosophical challenge that German military thinking couldn't overcome. "American warfare operates on principles we never conceived," he observed. "Where we conserve, they expend. Where we plan carefully, they improvise continuously. Where we husband resources, they assume unlimited supply. These aren't military tactics. This is industrial civilization applied to warfare." The Red Ball Express had revealed fundamental differences between European and American approaches to conflict that transcended mere logistics. German military culture emphasized precision, planning, and resource conservation developed through centuries of limited European warfare. American military culture emphasized speed, improvisation, and resource abundance enabled by continental industrial capacity. Major General Siegfried Westphal provided the most psychologically devastating analysis. "The Americans waste more fuel moving fuel than we allocate to entire army groups," he reported after studying captured intelligence documents. "They discard vehicles for minor repairs that we would consider routine maintenance. They operate on consumption assumptions that would bankrupt European nations. This isn't military inefficiency. This is abundance beyond our comprehension." The sound of American trucks had become psychological warfare more effective than any propaganda operation. German soldiers could hear Red Ball convoys at night, endless streams of motors that never stopped carrying supplies that never ran short. The knowledge that enemies possessed unlimited ammunition, while defenders rationed their last rounds, created despair that undermined combat effectiveness more than battlefield defeats. Intelligence reports documented American supply operations that violated every principle of military science taught in German staff colleges. Convoys operated with headlights blazing in defiance of air attack that never came. Vehicles maintained no spacing that would prevent cascading failures when trucks broke down. Maintenance was performed on roadsides rather than in secure facilities. Every practice should have resulted in catastrophic logistics failure. Instead, American supply rates accelerated. The most psychologically damaging intelligence came from German prisoners of war forced to work in American supply operations. These soldiers returned from captivity with reports that shattered remaining German confidence in eventual victory. Americans treated captured vehicles as disposable equipment. They replaced engines rather than repairing them. They abandoned trucks for minor problems rather than conducting field maintenance. Field Marshal Model's final assessment acknowledged German defeat in terms that no propaganda could obscure. "The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined possible," he concluded. "Americans have industrialized military logistics beyond our ability to comprehend or counter. We face not an army, but an entire civilization mobilized for total war. Our defeat is inevitable, not because we lack courage or skill, but because we lack the industrial capacity to match their abundance." The conference ended in silence as German officers contemplated the mathematical impossibility of victory against American industrial might. The Red Ball Express had proven that in modern warfare, factories mattered more than fortresses, production lines more than battle lines, and trucks more than tanks. In May 1945, with Germany surrendering unconditionally to Allied forces, captured Wehrmacht officers were required to provide detailed assessments of American military capabilities for historical records. Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. The Red Ball Express had revolutionized warfare in ways that German military science had never conceived possible, proving that industrial democracy could mobilize resources on scales that totalitarian efficiency couldn't match. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schulz, whose forces had faced the full impact of American logistics superiority, summarized the fundamental lesson that German commanders learned too late. "The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined," he stated during interrogation. "Americans created a temporary civilization of thousands of men and vehicles that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in days." The most insightful analysis came from General de Panzertruppe Heinz Guderian, father of German armored warfare, whose tactical innovations had revolutionized European military thinking. "We invented blitzkrieg, but never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics," he admitted in his post-war memoirs. "Americans solved it through industrial excess we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces in Allied abundance." The operational statistics of the Red Ball Express stood as testament to American industrial warfare that had redefined military possibility. 82 days of continuous operation, 412,000 tons of supplies delivered over distances that should have made such tonnage mathematically impossible. 222 million ton miles, accomplished by drivers who operated beyond human endurance limits, but achieved results that German precision couldn't match. German military historians, studying the operation after the war, identified principles that contradicted everything European military academies taught about logistics management. Volume overcame inefficiency through sheer abundance. Mechanical redundancy eliminated vulnerability by assuming massive failure rates and planning accordingly. Decentralized execution enabled speed by allowing junior officers to make decisions that German doctrine reserved for senior commanders. Standardization multiplied capability by creating interchangeable parts and procedures. The human cost had been significant but acceptable by American standards. 300 drivers killed in accidents during the operational period. Thousands more hospitalized for exhaustion, injuries, and medical conditions caused by operating beyond normal human limits. Yet morale remained extraordinarily high throughout the operation because drivers understood they were making history while proving Hitler's racial theories catastrophically wrong. The unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was its revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America, with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry that would dominate global commerce for decades. They had learned in France that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours daily, you can move the world. Military historians universally recognize the Red Ball Express as the decisive logistics operation of the European theatre. Without it, Patton's advance stops at the Seine River, Paris falls weeks later, and German forces successfully establish winter defensive lines that extend the war into 1946. The operation validated American military doctrine that emphasized logistics over tactics, proving that in modern warfare, the ability to supply forces determines victory more than tactical brilliance. The cost to the United States was approximately $100 million in 1944 currency. Vehicles destroyed, fuel consumed, infrastructure damaged, French civilian claims for property damage. German staff officers, accustomed to managing scarcity, found the figure incomprehensible. Americans considered it cheap. The operation enabled the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Each day of continued warfare cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in reduced conflict duration. The demographic reality that 75% of Red Ball drivers were African American soldiers created pressure for military integration that contributed to civil rights advances. These men had proved in France what they always knew. Given equal tools and opportunity, they would match anyone's performance. General Dwight Eisenhower, witnessing Red Ball operations, recognized the contradiction between segregation and battlefield effectiveness. The success created momentum for military desegregation that occurred 3 years later. The final testament to the Red Ball Express came from Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, among Germany's most competent commanders, when asked what most surprised him about American forces. His answer revealed the fundamental lesson of modern warfare: not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized your entire society's production capacity. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers. On November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued as advancing rail lines reduced truck requirements. The massive operation that was supposed to last 10 days had continued for 82 days, delivering 412,000 tons of supplies and proving that American industrial democracy could achieve logistics miracles that European military expertise couldn't match. The highways of France still bear scars from the Red Ball Express: ruts worn by overloaded trucks, bridges hastily repaired, roadsides littered with abandoned vehicles. But the greatest monument to the operation is the speed of Allied victory. Every day, the war shortened, saved thousands of lives. The Red Ball Express shortened it by months, proving that in modern warfare, logistics determines strategy, supply creates victory, and sometimes the most decisive weapon is a truck driven by determined soldiers who refuse to accept defeat.